The fluorescent hum of the cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, was a familiar lullaby, or it would have been if I'd had a home to return to. Instead, it was just another place to kill time, another sterile expanse reflecting my own emptiness. The clatter of a dropped fork somewhere in the cavernous space made me flinch. My hands, calloused from manual labor, felt clumsy against the smooth formica tabletop. I traced the faint rings left by countless coffee cups, each one a ghost of a meal, a conversation, a moment of respite I couldn't afford. My landlord's final notice was tucked into my wallet, a crisp, white accusation. Rent was due, and my meager savings were gone, swallowed by the insatiable maw of bills. I'd worked double shifts at the construction site, my muscles screaming in protest, but it was never enough. The city, with its glittering promises, had chewed me up and spat me out, leaving me with nothing but debt and a gnawing sense of failure. Then came the letter, thick, cream-colored parchment sealed with a crest I didn't recognize. It spoke of a distant relative, a gray-tant twice removed, a name I'd never heard. She'd apparently passed, leaving her entire estate to me. The lawyer's office was a stark contrast to this echoing cafeteria, all polished wood and hushed tones. The lawyer, a man whose suit seemed to whisper of old money, had laid out the terms. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was property. A sprawling estate, miles from anywhere, untouched for decades. The will was peculiar, filled with archaic phrasing and a single chilling clause. I had to reside there alone for 1 full year before I could claim the full inheritance. Failure to do so meant everything reverted to a trust, its beneficiaries unknown. A year, I'd echoed, the words tasting foreign. The lawyer had merely nodded, his expression unreadable. The terms are quite explicit, Mr. Raj. He'd handed me a single tarnished key and a map that looked more like a relic than a guide. The caretaker will meet I there. He has instructions. The caretaker, that was another oddity. Why would a solitary estate need a caretaker? And why would my grey-tant, whom I'd never known, leave me such a bizarre legacy? The road narrowed, becoming a rutted track that clawed its way deeper into the wilderness. The map, as I'd suspected, was less a guide and more a suggestion. The GPS had given up long ago, the signal a distant memory. The trees pressed in, their branches' skeletal fingers reaching for the sky, blotting out the last vestiges of daylight. A damp, earthy smell, tinged with something acrid, filled the air. It was the smell of decay, of things long buried. And then I saw it, or rather I felt it before I saw it. A shift in the air, a palpable heaviness that settled on my chest. The track opened into a clearing, and there it stood. The mansion. It wasn't just old, it was ancient, a hulking silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Stone walls, stained with moss and time, seemed to sag under an unseen weight. A single wrought iron gate, rusted and askew, hung open, an invitation or a warning. It was more imposing than I'd imagined, more forbidding. His face was obscured by the gloom, but I could feel his gaze, sharp and assessing. This, I presumed, was the caretaker. I am Raj. His voice was a low rasp, like dry leaves skittering across stone. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. The master's will is clear. I am to reside here alone. He gestured with a skeletal hand towards the imposing structure. The house, it has its own ways, it provides, but it also takes. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. My hands, still resting on the cafeteria table, felt clammy. The distant clang of metal from the kitchen seemed to echo unnaturally, amplified in the vast emptiness. I thought of the lawyer's words, the cryptic clause, the promise of wealth. Was this a fortune or a trap? And what did the caretaker mean the house takes? What did it take? The clatter of the tray was the last normal sound I registered. It bounced off the linoleum floor of the cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, and seemed to shatter the fragile peace the stranger had left hanging in the air. He was gone, vanished into the night as abruptly as he'd appeared, leaving me with a gnawing unease and a key that felt impossibly heavy in my palm. The cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, was usually a place of quiet, if weary, solitude after closing. Tonight it felt observed. The fluorescent lights hummed a little too loudly, casting long, distorted shadows from the stacked chairs and overturned milk cartons. I could still smell the stale coffee and the phantom scent of yesterday's fried onions. My own breath hitched, a dry, rasping sound in the sudden stillness. My fingers traced the intricate, unfamiliar crest embossed on the key. It was cold, unnaturally so, even in the stifling summer heat that clung to the room. The stranger's words about the inheritance, about the mansion, about the condition, replayed in my mind like a broken record. The property is particular, he'd said. It demands attention from its resident. What did that even mean? Was he some kind of eccentric lawyer, a caretaker? He'd offered no identification, just the key and a cryptic set of instructions delivered in hushed, urgent tones. And now I was left holding the key to a place I'd never seen, a place that had suddenly become my sole inheritance. My determination, the one that had driven me to take this job, to work these graveyard shifts, felt like a flickering candle in a hurricane. I stood, the scraping of my chair a sudden, violent intrusion. The sound seemed to hang in the air, a tangible thing. I needed to get out of here. I needed to see this place. The promise of wealth, however veiled in mystery, was a potent lure, enough to escape the endless cycle of late nights and early mornings, enough to finally breathe. I pocketed the key, the cold metal pressing a sharp imprint through the thin fabric of my jeans. The drive to the mansion was a blur of headlights on wet asphalt. The rain had started, a fine, insistent drizzle that slicked the roads and obscured the already faint road signs. My old car, a sputtering testament to my meager finances, coughed and wheezed its way through the deserted countryside. Each mile felt like a step further away from everything I knew, a deliberate descent into the unknown. The GPS signal had died an hour ago, leaving me to navigate by a faded, hand-drawn map the stranger had pressed into my hand. Finally, a pair of wrought iron gates, twisted and rusted, loomed out of the gloom. They were half open, as if inviting me in, or perhaps as if they couldn't quite contain whatever lay beyond. The mansion itself was barely visible, a hulking silhouette against the bruised, starless sky. I parked the car a good distance from the house, the tires sinking slightly into the mud. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle. The metal was icy, biting into my skin. Dust motes danced in the weak beam of my phone's flashlight, swirling like disturbed spirits. It smelled of mildew, old paper, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. My flashlight beam swept across the grand staircase, its banister carved with grotesque figures that seemed to twist and leer in the shifting light. I took a tentative step inside, my boot crunching on fallen plaster. I fumbled for the light switch, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. Cobwebs, thick as cotton candy, draped from the ceiling and clung to the ornate, dusty furniture. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text message. Relief surged through me. I pulled it out. Hoping for a lifeline, a message from the outside world. It was from my sister. "Are you okay? Haven't heard from you in days." My stomach plummeted. Days? I'd only been driving for hours. I stared at the message, then at the date and time stamp. It was correct, but it felt wrong, impossible. I tried to reply, my thumbs flying across the screen. "Just arrived, everything's fine." The message wouldn't send. Message failed to send. I tried again and again. The signal bars on my phone were gone. Completely. A faint scratching sound from upstairs. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like a mouse trapped in the walls. But it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I froze, straining my ears. The scratching stopped. Then a soft thud, as if something heavy had fallen. My breath hitched. It was just the old house settling, I told myself. Old houses made noises. Was I truly alone in here? He was gone. Vanished into the night as abruptly as he'd appeared, leaving behind only the stale scent of damp wool and the unsettling weight of his words. They watch. They always watch. I stood there for a long moment, the silence of the deserted space pressing in. The fluorescent lights hummed, a monotonous, sickly drone that seemed to amplify the emptiness. Each tray, meticulously arranged with plastic cutlery and empty milk cartons, was a tiny monument to a meal that would never be eaten. My own stomach churned, not from hunger, but from a growing unease. The stranger's cryptic warning echoed in my mind, a dark whisper against the hum of the lights. They watch. Who were they, and what did they want? I picked up the fallen tray, the metal cool and slick under my fingers. It felt absurdly heavy, as if it held more than just its own weight. I placed it back on the counter, the metallic scrape jarring in the stillness. The stranger had spoken of the house, of its history, of its appetites. He'd called it a trap. I dismissed him as a madman, a hallucination born of exhaustion and the unnerving solitude of this place. But now, with the house groaning around me like a wounded beast, his words felt less like ravings and more like prophecies. I walked out of the cafeteria, the automatic doors sliding open with a hiss that sounded like a sigh. I tried to call the authorities, of course. The landline in the study was dead, a corroded mess of wires. My mobile phone, which had miraculously held a signal earlier, now displayed only no service. The satellite phone the stranger had mentioned, a bulky, old-fashioned thing, remained stubbornly silent, its battery indicator a stark, empty bar. It was as if the house itself had severed my last threads to the outside world. A draft snaked through the hallway, carrying with it the faint, cloying scent of decay, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I'd been trying to catalog the contents of the study, following the instructions in the will, hoping to find some clue, some explanation for the immense fortune that was supposed to be mine. But every time I settled down to work, the house would stir. Tonight, it was the photographs. They were arranged on a dusty mahogany desk, a collection of faded portraits of people I didn't recognize. Stern-faced men and women in antiquated clothing, their eyes seeming to follow me. I'd felt a prickle of apprehension when I first found them, but I'd told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Now, as I stood in the dim light, one of the portraits seemed to shift. A woman with severe hair and a tightly pursed mouth. I blinked and the illusion vanished, but the feeling of being watched, of being judged, lingered. I turned away from the desk, my breath catching in my throat. The silence was no longer empty, it was filled with a palpable tension, a coiled expectancy. I could feel it in the prickle of my skin, in the way my muscles tensed, ready to spring at any moment. I walked towards the grand staircase, the worn velvet runner muffling my footsteps. Each tread groaned under my weight, a mournful protest. I paused, listening. There was that a sound from the floor above, a soft, shuffling noise, like slippered feet dragging across wood. I strained my ears, trying to decipher the sound. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it sent a tremor through me. I told myself it was just the old house settling, the wind whistling through a broken pane. But the stranger's words, "They watch," clawed at my resolve. I reached the landing, my hand clammy as I gripped the ornate banister. The air here was thick, heavy with a scent I couldn't quite place, something metallic, like old pennies, mingled with the mustiness of forgotten things. I remembered the stranger's warning, "Don't go into the rooms you're not meant to enter." But a morbid curiosity, fueled by a desperate need for answers, was gnawing at me. As I approached, a faint scratching sound emanated from behind it, not the random creak of old wood, but a deliberate, rhythmic scraping, like fingernails on a door. Then a low, guttural moan, barely audible, seeped from beneath the door. It wasn't human, not entirely. It was a sound of profound, ancient suffering. My breath hitched. My palms were slick with sweat. I wanted to run, to flee down the stairs and out into the night, but my feet were rooted to the spot. What was behind that door, and why did it sound like it was waiting for me? The air in the cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, hung thick and stale, a cloying blend of old grease and something else, something vaguely metallic and sour. I'd been pacing the echoing halls of the mansion for hours, the oppressive silence a constant, gnawing pressure. Sleep was a distant, mocking memory. My flashlight beam, a thin, desperate finger, cut through the gloom, dancing over the untouched meals. The plastic forks lay beside the grayish, congealed food. It was as if everyone had simply vanished mid-bite. I ran a hand over my stubbled jaw, the grit a familiar sensation now. This house. It was more than just old. It was watchful. I felt it in the way the floorboards groaned when I walked, not with age, but with a sort of weary, deliberate protest. I felt it in the shadows that seemed to pool in corners, deepening even when my light was on them. Raj, I told myself, I letting this place get to I. A writer's overactive imagination, that's all. But the tremor in my hands, the quickening of my pulse when a distant creak echoed through the vast, empty structure, told a different story. My focus had narrowed. The cryptic will, the promise of wealth, it was all fading into the background, replaced by a gnawing curiosity, a need to understand what made this place tick, or rather, what made it stop. The stillness of the cafeteria was the latest puzzle piece. Who ate here, when, and why did it all look so abandoned? I'd found no journals, no letters, nothing to explain the former inhabitants. Just these silent, disturbing remnants. I knelt by one of the trays, the plastic cool and slightly sticky beneath my fingertips. The smell, faint but persistent, made my stomach churn. I imagined the last person to sit at this table, their fork poised, their eyes wide with, what fear? surprise, or just the mundane boredom of a late-night meal, a sudden, sharp rap from somewhere upstairs made me jump. My flashlight beam swung wildly, illuminating a patch of peeling wallpaper. My breath hitched. It was just the house settling, I told myself. Old houses do that. But the sound had been too distinct, too deliberate. It wasn't the groan of wood. It was a sharp, percussive knock. 3 times. I stood, my muscles tense, a held breath. I had to find out what was going on. This wasn't just about the will anymore. It was about survival. It was about understanding the predator I was living with. My steps were cautious as I made my way out of the cafeteria and back into the main hall. Each tread creaked under my weight, the sound amplified in the cavernous space. I kept my flashlight beam steady, sweeping it across the ornate, dusty furnishings, the portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my progress. I reached the landing, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The knocking hadn't repeated. Had I imagined it? No, the conviction was too strong. It was a signal, a warning, an invitation. My gaze fell on a heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. I'd avoided this wing of the house. It felt heavier, but the knocking had come from this direction. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning a mournful protest. The room beyond was a study, or what had once been one. Bookshelves lined the walls, their contents obscured by dust and cobwebs. A large, mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface littered with papers. My flashlight beam landed on the desk. The papers weren't just scattered, they were arranged in a deliberate, almost artistic chaos. Some were yellowed and brittle, others seemed newer, the ink still remarkably black. I approached cautiously, my boots crunching on something soft on the floor. I looked down. It was a scattering of dried leaves, strangely out of place in this indoor space. I picked up the nearest document. It was a single sheet, covered in elegant, looping script. My eyes scanned the words, my mind struggling to process them. It was a list of names, and beside each name a date and then a single word. My breath caught in my throat. My own name was on the list, and the word beside it. It wasn't a date, it was a description, my description. A gust of wind, impassable in this sealed room, swept through the study, scattering the papers. The metallic tang in the air intensified, sharp and acrid. My hands were slick with sweat. What was this place? What was happening to me? The fluorescent lights of the cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, hummed a low, sickly drone. Each flicker felt like a tiny electric shock against my raw nerves. I traced the condensation on my water glass, the cold seeping into my fingertips, a stark contrast to the clammy heat that seemed to emanate from the very walls of this place. The stale air, a cloying blend of old grease and something else. Something vaguely metallic and sour clung to my clothes, my hair, my skin. Sleep was a distant, impossible luxury. My gaze drifted to the rows of abandoned trays, remnants of a meal I hadn't eaten, a life that felt impossibly far away. The plastic cutlery lay askew, the styrofoam cups upturned, as if the diners had fled in a sudden panic. Waiting for what? I was beginning to understand with a creeping, icy certainty. I'd tried to dismiss it. I'd told myself it was the wind, the old house settling, the strain of isolation playing tricks on my mind. But tonight something shifted. It started with the scent, that metallic sour tang. It was stronger here in the cavernous cafeteria. It wasn't just stale food, it was the smell of decay, of something rotting from the inside out. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to pinpoint its source. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a pervasive miasma. Then, the lights flickered violently, not just a simple dimming, but a frantic, strobe-like assault that threw the room into disorienting bursts of harsh white, or rather I felt it. A presence, a vast, ancient hunger that filled the space between my frantic breaths. It was a weight, pressing down, making it hard to stand, hard to think. My hands clenched into fists. I needed to get out. The car keys were in my jacket pocket, still slung over the back of a chair. I lunged for them, my movements clumsy, desperate. As my fingers brushed against the cool metal, a sound scraped across the linoleum floor. A slow, deliberate drag, like something heavy, something with sharp edges being pulled. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The sound stopped. My breath hitched. I strained my ears, listening for the faintest creak, the softest rustle. Nothing, only the frantic thrum of blood in my own ears. Slowly, excruciatingly, I reached for my jacket. My fingers fumbled with the fabric. I could feel eyes on me, unseen, unblinking. The feeling was visceral, a prickling sensation across the back of my neck, a tightening in my gut. It was the same feeling I'd had when I first stepped into the house, but amplified, concentrated, 1,000 times worse. I yanked the jacket on, the familiar weight a small comfort, and turned, ready to bolt. That's when I saw it. It formed a shape. Not a random splatter, but something deliberate, something that resembled a gaping maw. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. The house, it wasn't just haunted, it was alive, it was aware, and it was hungry. My legs felt like laid. The urge to run was overwhelming, but my feet were rooted to the spot. The trays on the tables seemed to tilt, the discarded food on them appearing to writhe. Was I imagining it, or was the house actively trying to break me? To make me see things, to make me doubt my own senses? The metallic scent intensified, filling my lungs, making me gag. It was the smell of fear, of despair, of something long dead but unwilling to stay buried. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a trick of the light or an overactive imagination. This was real, and I was trapped. What was it that the house wanted? And how could I possibly escape something that fed on my very essence? The chill that had settled deep in my bones wasn't from the draft seeping through the rotting window frames. It was a cold that had nothing to do with temperature, a primal dread that had latched onto my soul. The voice. It wasn't a hallucination. I knew that now with a certainty that made my stomach clench. The house. It was aware, and it wanted me. My fingers, stiff and numb, traced the peeling wallpaper. The floral pattern, once vibrant, now bled into a sickly brown. Like dried bloodstains, I had to get out. I had to break free from this decaying prison. My gaze fell on the heavy oak door leading from the library, the one I'd found jammed shut yesterday. If I could just force it open, I could reach the main hall, the front door, the open road. Freedom. I lunged at it, my shoulders slamming against the unyielding wood. A dull thud vibrated through my arm, but the door didn't budge. I threw my weight against it again, desperation fueling a surge of adrenaline. Nothing. It was as if the house itself had fused it shut, mocking my efforts. A dry, rasping sound, like brittle leaves skittering across stone, seemed to emanate from the walls. My breath hitched. I backed away, my eyes darting around the cavernous room. The books, rows upon rows of them, seemed to lean in, their leather-bound spines like leering faces. I'd spent hours yesterday poring over them, searching for any clue, any hint of the true nature of this place. I'd found journals, brittle with age, filled with the frantic scribblings of previous inhabitants. They wrote of the house's hunger, its insatiable need to feed. One journal, bound in what felt disturbingly like human skin, had detailed the house's methods. It didn't just scare, it learned. It probed the deepest recesses of the mind, finding the cracks, the hidden anxieties, and exploiting them. My own fears, the ones I'd buried so deep. I'd almost forgotten them, the fear of failure, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being utterly alone. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but the air had grown heavy, thick with an unseen presence. It felt like being watched not by eyes, but by something far more ancient and predatory. I stumbled towards the grand staircase, my only path to the upper floors, and perhaps a different exit. I could feel it now. A subtle pressure against my skin, like 1,000 tiny hands, unseen, unheard, pushing me back down. My mind reeled. It had promised an eternity of suffering. Was this it? This slow, suffocating descent into madness? I reached the landing, my legs trembling. I remembered the room at the end, the one with the strange, pulsating light. I had to see what was in there. It felt like the heart of the house, the source of its power. As I took a hesitant step forward, a faint, melodic sound drifted from the room. It was a lullaby, a gentle, soothing tune, my mother's lullaby, the one she used to sing to me when I was a child when the nightmares came. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, so potent it threatened to buckle my knees. It was a perfect mimicry, a cruel echo of comfort designed to disarm me, but I knew better. This wasn't comfort. This was a trap. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus. I had to push past the illusion. I had to shatter the facade. I started to walk again, my footsteps now deliberate, determined. The lullaby grew louder, more insistent, weaving its way into the fabric of my thoughts. It was so real, so achingly familiar. I could almost smell the faint scent of lavender, a scent I hadn't encountered in years. The door at the end of the hall stood ajar. The pulsating light within spilled out, painting the worn carpet in sickly hues of green and violet. The lullaby was now a deafening chorus, a siren song luring me in. I could feel the house's awareness pressing in, a tangible weight on my chest. It was feeding on my hesitation, on my grief. My hand reached for the doorknob. I hesitated. The lullaby was so potent, so seductive. It promised an end to the fear, a return to a time of innocence. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the icy air burning my lungs. I had to know what lay beyond that door. What did the house want from me? Was this its ultimate weapon, the weapon of memory and regret? Suddenly, a new sound cut through the lullaby, a frantic scratching coming from inside the room. It was desperate, like an animal trapped, but it wasn't the sound of an animal. It was the sound of a human hand clawing at wood. Was there someone else trapped in here, or was this another cruel trick, another layer of the house's elaborate deception? I pushed the door open. The room was a disorienting spectacle. In the center of the room, a single tarnished silver tray sat on a small, rickety table. On the tray, a half-eaten meal, the food long since congealed and unappetizing. It looked like something from a cafeteria, yet here, in this decaying mansion, it felt profoundly wrong. The air here was thick with a metallic tang, like old pennies and something else, something cloying and sweet. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room. There were no windows, no other doors, just the pulsing walls, the sickly light, and the tray. And then I saw it. Scratched into the surface of the table just beneath the tray were words, faint, almost invisible, but undeniably there. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat. The words were a single sentence, repeated over and over, as if by a desperate hand. It watches, it feeds, it never lets go. A low hum began to fill the room, emanating from the very walls. The lullaby had stopped, replaced by this new, unsettling drone. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, as if unseen insects were crawling over me. My gaze flickered back to the tray. The food, I now noticed, seemed to be moving, a faint, almost imperceptible rippling beneath the congealed surface. Was this what the house wanted? To break me down piece by piece, until I was just another whisper in its suffocating silence. The hum. It was still there. A low thrumming that vibrated not just in my ears, but in my teeth, in my bones. I pressed my palms to the plastered walls, trying to pinpoint its origin. It felt like the house was breathing, a slow, ragged inhale and exhale that seeped into me. The prickling sensation intensified, a phantom touch that made me flinch. I scrubbed at my arms, but there was nothing there. Just the slick, cool feel of my own skin, clammy with a sweat I hadn't realized I'd broken. That was the thought that clawed its way through the fog of unease. Out into the dawn, into the familiar grit of the city, away from this suffocating stillness that had begun to feel like a trap. I stumbled towards the grand staircase, my hand reaching for the carved banister. It was slick, not with dust, but with something viscous, something that clung to my fingertips like warm oil. I recoiled, my stomach lurching. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decaying lilies and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like old pennies. The shadows in the hallway seemed to deepen, to writhe. They weren't just the absence of light anymore. They were entities coalescing, stretching. I could feel their gaze, 100 unseen eyes boring into me. My breath hitched. This was it, wasn't it? The house was done playing games. It was ready to consume me. I forced my legs to move, a desperate scramble down the stairs. Each creak of the ancient wood was a gunshot in the silence. Portraits lining the walls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my descent. Their smiles were no longer benign, they were predatory, sharp. I imagined them stepping out of their frames, their canvas skin rippling, their oil eyes blinking. The front door was my goal, solid oak, heavy, a barrier between me and whatever this place was becoming. I reached the foyer, my hand outstretched. I twisted. It didn't budge. Locked. Of course it was locked. I rattled it, a frantic, pathetic sound. Then I slammed my shoulder against it. The wood groaned but held firm. I backed away, my eyes darting around the cavernous space. The hum was louder now, a visceral thrumming that made my head ache. The air shimmered as if heat was rising from the very floor. I closed my eyes, trying to summon some semblance of control. Think, Raj, think. The will, the wealth. It had all been a lie, a lure. This wasn't a house. It was a predator. A faint light flickered in the distance. Down a corridor I hadn't noticed before. It pulsed, a soft, inviting glow. Against all rational thought, against the screaming instinct to run, to hide, I found myself drawn to it. It was a siren's call, promising an escape, a solution. My feet moved before I could stop them, a slow, reluctant march towards the light. The corridor narrowed as I walked. the walls closing in, the scent of lilies and metal growing stronger. The light intensified, resolving into a doorway. Open, beyond it, I could see a space I didn't recognize. It looked modern, clean, a stark contrast to the decaying grandeur of the mansion. Hesitantly, I stepped through. The humming ceased abruptly. The air was cool, sterile. I stood in a brightly lit room, filled with rows of stainless steel tables. Trays, some still holding the congealed remnants of food, were neatly stacked. It was a cafeteria. A cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, but how? This was deep within the house, miles from any road, any connection to the outside world. I walked between the tables, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. The trays, they looked so ordinary, so mundane. Yet in this place they felt like a mockery, a cruel joke played by a house that seemed to warp reality itself. I reached the end of the room where a large window looked out onto nothing, no trees, no sky, no stars. The house had brought me here, to this impossible place, but why? What did it want me to see in this phantom cafeteria? The hum. The prickling sensation I'd felt earlier had bloomed into a full-body awareness, 1,000 tiny needles under my skin. Every shadow seemed to deepen, to writhe just at the edge of my vision. I told myself it was exhaustion, the strain of the past few weeks, the gnawing uncertainty of what this place truly was. But a deeper part of me, the part that remembered the whispers in the drafty halls, the cold spots that clung like damp shrouds, knew better. I'd tried to leave. Twice. The first time, the car simply refused to start, the engine turning over with a choked, dying gasp. The second, the road ahead had dissolved into an impenetrable fog, thick and cloying, smelling faintly of decaying leaves and something else, something metallic. Raj, I'd muttered to myself, I re losing it. This is all in my head. The will. The promise of wealth. It felt like a cruel joke now, a lure cast into a trap. My distant relative, a name I'd never heard until the solicitor's letter arrived, had left me this mausoleum, and it wanted something. It fed on something, my fears certainly, my isolation undeniably, but there was more, a hunger that resonated with the house's very structure, a deep, gnawing emptiness. I found myself drawn, as I often was, to the west wing. Floorboards creaked under my weight with a sound like old bones snapping. I moved slowly, my senses on high alert. Then I saw it. No lock, no hinges visible from this side. It simply belonged. My heart, which I'd been trying to keep steady, gave a traitorous lurch. This was it, the source. My hand trembled as I reached for the iron ring. I pulled. The door didn't budge. I braced myself, dug my heels into the rough stone floor, and pulled again with all my might. A low groan, a sound like a dying beast, echoed from behind the wood. The door creaked inward, revealing not a room but a descent. Stone steps, worn smooth by countless feet, spiraled down into absolute blackness. The air that rose to meet me was thick with the smell of damp earth, of dust, and that same unsettling metallic tang. The hum was a tangible presence now, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth beneath the manor. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat. I had to know. The wealth, the escape, it all hinged on what lay below. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I stepped onto the first stair. The walls were rough-hewn, slick with condensation. Each step echoed, the sound swallowed by the vastness. My breath plumed in front of me, white ghosts in the beam of my light. The hum was a physical pressure now, pressing against my eardrums, making my visions swim. I felt a growing sense of unease, a primal urge to turn back, to flee this place and never look behind me. But the promise, the cryptic words of the will drew me onward. To the one who understands, all shall be revealed. I reached the bottom. My flashlight beam swept across a vast cavernous space. It wasn't a cellar, it was a place. A natural formation, perhaps, a sinkhole of immense proportions, but the walls were too smooth, too regular. And in the center, pulsating with a dull, internal light, was something that defied description. It was a nexus. The hum was loudest here, a deafening roar that vibrated through my entire being. It wasn't a sound, not entirely. It was a feeling, a raw, untamed energy that thrummed with malevolence. And then I saw them, shapes coalescing within the shifting mass. Faces, not human faces, not exactly. They were the echoes of those who had come before, trapped, consumed. And I recognized some of them, the faint outlines of the previous owners, the ones whose portraits hung in the dusty halls, their eyes seeming to follow me. You are here, you have come. My flashlight beam wavered. My hands shook so violently I could barely hold it. This was the source. This was the hunger. This was Blackwood Manor. "What do you want?" I managed to project, the words a desperate thought, a fragile plea. The entity shifted, the faces within it swirling like a vortex. What it has always wanted, to be fed, to be whole. A searing pain shot through my temples. Images flooded my mind, not my memories, but its memories. Centuries of despair, of hunger, of lives extinguished. It showed me the trap, the lure of wealth, the isolation. My own fears, the ones I'd tried so hard to bury, began to surface. The fear of failure, of being alone, of being forgotten. They twisted and contorted, fueled by the entity's power, threatening to consume me. I felt myself weakening, my resolve fraying. It won't be another. The entity seemed to recoil, the light within it flaring, then dimming. It was as if the very air had turned to ice. Bound, how? The inheritance. It wasn't just a house, it was a prison, and I was its newest inmate. But then another thought, a flicker of defiance, ignited within me. If it fed on fear, on despair, then what would it do if it found something else? Resilience, understanding. I focused, forcing my racing thoughts to coalesce. The hum, the pulsing light. The faces, it was all connected. The house, the entity, the wealth. It was a system, and systems could be understood. What is the wealth? I projected, my voice gaining a fraction of its former strength. What is it you offer? The entity hesitated, the swirling mass momentarily still. A flicker of something akin to surprise or perhaps curiosity pulsed within its depths. A release, a transcendence, a joining. Joining, it wasn't about money, it was about assimilation. My flashlight beam caught something glinting on the cavern floor near the entity. A small, tarnished locket. I recognized it. It belonged to the previous owner, the one whose portrait had always seemed to hold a profound sadness. I took a step towards it, my eyes never leaving the shifting mass. The entity didn't react, didn't try to stop me. It was waiting for me to break. My fingers closed around the cold metal of the locket. It was warm now, strangely warm. He promised, but he lied. The entity pulsed again, more violently this time. The faces within it contorted, a silent chorus of agony. Was this the climax, or just the prelude to my own undoing? The air in the cafeteria at 2 a.m., trays still set out, tasted like stale coffee and something else, something metallic and sharp. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant, unpleasant reminder. I traced the rim of my own tray, the plastic cool and smooth beneath my fingertip. The fluorescent lights hummed, a low, persistent drone that grated on my nerves, but at least it was a familiar sound. Unlike the whispers, unlike the pulsing, it had stopped finally. The suffocating pressure, the visual onslaught of contorted faces, the unnerving question echoing in the void. It had receded like a tide pulling back from a ravaged shore, leaving behind a profound, unsettling quiet. I was still here. My hands, though trembling, were my own. My breath, ragged and shallow, still filled my lungs, but the locket. I opened my palm, and there it was. The intricate engraving, once a source of morbid fascination, now seemed to mock me. It was smooth, worn by time, and held a secret that had nearly consumed me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the image of those faces, their silent screams etched into my memory. Who lied? The question still hung in the air, unanswered. The will. It had been the bait, hadn't it? A lure cast into the murky waters of my desperation. Raj, the distant heir, the forgotten branch of a twisted family tree. I had been so eager, so blind. The house. Blackwood Manor. It wasn't just a building, it was a cage, a maw that had tried to swallow me whole. The pervasive scent of dust and decay, overlaid with something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun, and the sounds. The incessant creaking, the phantom footsteps, the rustling behind the walls that was never just rats. The entity, it had been the house, hadn't it, or a part of it, a manifestation of its hunger, its ancient, festering resentment. It had fed on my loneliness, my anxieties, the unspoken fears that I had carried with me since childhood. I had almost yielded, a plea. But then, the locket, a flicker of something else, a different kind of pain, a betrayal. I stood up. The scraping of my chair, a jarring intrusion in the stillness. My legs felt stiff, as if they belonged to someone else. I walked to the window, the glass grimy and streaked. Outside, the pre-dawn sky was a bruised purple, the first hints of gray bleeding into the horizon. No stars. I had left it. I had walked away, the locket clutched in my hand, the memory of the pulsing entity a raw wound in my mind. I hadn't looked back. I couldn't. The thought of its looming silhouette against the sky sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. But what had I truly escaped? The physical structure, the isolation it had perfected. I was out, yes. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was the presence of something that should be there, a connection, a sense of safety. I looked down at my hands again. They were steady now, but the skin felt too thin, too fragile, as if I could see the veins beneath, the pathways of my own lifeblood, pulsing with a rhythm that felt alien. The wealth. It was a joke. The true inheritance was this. The cafeteria at 2 a.m. trays still set out was a temporary refuge, a place where the ordinary rules of time and space seemed to bend but not break, a place where I could try to piece myself back together, shard by agonizing shard. But the pieces felt different now, sharper, more prone to drawing blood. I picked up a stray sugar packet, turning it over and over. The house was still there. It had tried to break me, to absorb me, to make me another face in its spectral chorus. It hadn't succeeded, but had it left a part of itself behind, a seed of its malevolence, planted deep within the soil of my own being? The question, like so many others, remained. And as the first weak rays of sunlight began to filter through the grimy window, I wondered if the real horror had only just begun.